Hi everyone, welcome back to Much Ado About History, and welcome back to another episode in my Documents series. When we think about the founding documents of our nation, there are many that we can look to, but two in particular stand out. One being the United States Constitution, which literally put our system on paper and created the government that's still operating today. The second one is more about ideas. It puts our American ideas and ideals down on paper for the whole world to see, and tried to put us on the path for the nation that we would become. And that's what we're going to study today, the Declaration of Independence. So let's take a look at the Declaration of Independence. As always, I recommend that you have a pen or a pencil nearby, and also a highlighter that we'll use to highlight or make notes to the document. So the Declaration of Independence, it's a long document, and I'm not going to read the entire thing to you. I'm not going to read it to you word for word, but I'm going to help you navigate it, and I'm going to help you understand that there are different parts to this document that you should be aware of, even if you don't read it word for word, or certainly I don't expect anyone to memorize it word for word. There are things that you need to know. One thing that you should know is that it was written by a committee of 5 men. There was a declaration committee of 5 that was put in charge of making a statement about declaring independence from Britain, but really it has one main author. Some of you may know this. The main author of the Declaration of Independence is Thomas Jefferson. Now, the document was edited and things were taken out and added and changed a little bit, but for the most part, these are Jefferson's words that he had borrowed from other great thinkers and philosophers and leaders before him. It says here, in Congress, July 4th, 1776. So when you see the word Congress, I don't want you to think of it as the U.S. Congress. Not such a thing existed. When they were meeting, this was actually the Second Continental Congress. There was a first one that met in 1774 to talk about the problems with Britain. 1775, a second one met and continued to meet through 1776. And so that's the Congress that they're talking about. And of course, these meetings did not take place in Washington, D.C. Such a place did not exist in 1776. So the meetings of the Second Continental Congress and the Declaration of Independence, they were written in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia, PA. That's where these meetings were held. That's where the Declaration was written and voted on and signed. July 4th, 1776. You obviously should recognize the date July 4th, which we nowadays just celebrate as Independence Day, or the 4th of July. The vote actually took place on July 2nd. July 4th, it was read before the Congress. It was the first public reading of the Declaration of Independence. It was signed by John Hancock. Many of the members did not sign it until many weeks later, but July 4th just becomes the date that we all become accustomed to as Independence Day. All right, let's look a little bit closer, especially at the first couple paragraphs, and then we're going to skip through some of the other parts in the rest of it. And so this is how it begins. So it begins with this: the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. So notice the word unanimous. Unanimous, of course, meaning that they all agreed. Independence was not voted on by majority, right? They had 13, so it wasn't just a 7-6 vote. They had made a motion and decided that for them to go through with this, all the 13 colonies would have to agree to declare independence, and they wouldn't divide themselves, some staying loyal and some becoming independent. They agreed if they were going to do this, they would all have to do it. So it's a unanimous declaration, and this is the first time they called themselves United States. Of course, before this, they had called themselves the United Colonies, but now they're saying we're no longer colonies and we are a nation. So unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. And this is the official beginning of the document. When in the course of human events. Now, that's a very dramatic way to begin by Jefferson. When in the course of human events. Okay? And what he really is just trying to find a nice way to introduce the document. It's just a way of saying, maybe like, over time, stuff happens. Or he could have said, in a relationship, which, is kind of what the colonies in Britain had, right? In a relationship where over time, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another. So he's saying one of us is breaking this relationship off. One people, the Americans, to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, the British. This is basically a breakup letter. The colonies are becoming states and they're breaking up with the king. They are separating themselves from Britain. And to assume among the powers of the earth. They're kind of like saying, and now we're going to become a nation. We're becoming a country. The separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. So we're going to be a country. We're going to be a nation. We're going to assume the powers of the earth like all the other nations. And he says, when you do this, when this thing happens, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. What he means here is, we're breaking up, we're declaring independence. We should really tell the world why. This is what this document is for. We want to share our opinion with the rest of mankind, and we're going to declare the causes for the separation. Why are we declaring our independence? So what are the reasons? And he says this is the purpose of the document. So we're sharing our reasons of why are we dividing from the British. The next paragraph contains probably some of the most important words written about the American view of the world and of government. And hopefully these are words that you'll come to know. Jefferson writes, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So, you might have heard this before. We hold these truths to be self-evident. When he says self-evident, he's really saying these should be obvious. These should be obvious to everybody that these are true. That all men are created equal. All right, this is a flaw a little bit, right? He says all men, doesn't mention women. So this is, an American belief that all men are created equal. Now we interpret this to mean all men and women. Of course, in Jefferson's day, they didn't really believe that all men are created equal. They still had the institution of slavery. So this definition has changed for us over our history. But it is stated in the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. Nowadays, we would say all men and women of all races and all groups and every, possible denomination are created equal. And that they are endowed by their Creator. So he doesn't say God, but he means God. He refers to God, their Creator, with certain unalienable rights. So if you think of the word alienated, if you're alienated from someone, that means you're separated from them. You're not together with them. So unalienable means you cannot be separated from these rights. These are yours. They were given to you by the Creator, according to Jefferson, and you cannot be separated from them. That among these, so he's saying not limited to, there are more, but among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Incredibly important words you've probably heard before, right? So we have a right to life, we have a right to liberty, freedom. And notice that he says the pursuit of happiness. He's not guaranteeing it, but he says you have the right to go and do what makes you happy. You might not be happy, but you have the right to pursue it. Then he says that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This is an important phrase. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The people. He's saying that people create governments. This is not what a king believed. A king believed that his power came from God. There was an old belief called the divine right of kings, that kings were chosen by God to be their rulers on earth. Jefferson says, nope. Governments have power because the people gave it to them. So this is a democratic idea, not something that a king would believe in. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, to those rights, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it and institute a new government. So that's what he says. It is the right of the people to alter and abolish it and institute a new government. So you can have a revolution, which they're doing. They're declaring their independence. We're getting rid of our old government, and we're starting a new one. Laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely the effect of their security and happiness. Okay? He also says, prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. What this means is, like, have good judgment. Prudence means have good judgment. If you have had a good government for a long time, and, you know, one leader comes around and you just don't like some of his ideas, that doesn't mean you tear down the whole system. Don't just have a revolution for small reasons. They should be big reasons. All right? So I'm just going to skip it down a little bit to the end of this paragraph and show you what he says here. The history of the present King of Great Britain, that was King George III, is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny, right? Like someone rules as a tyrant with absolute power over these states. To prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. So he's basically saying, we're going to tell you all the reasons that we are rebelling against this king. So for the next practically 2 pages, we have what a lot of people call the list of grievances. These are all the reasons that Jefferson is laying out about why they're rebelling against King George III. And we're not going to read them all in this video, but I want to point some of them out to you and some things they have in common. First, you'll notice that almost all of them begin, he has done this, he has dissolved, he has refused, he has called together, he has refused, he has forbidden. And it keeps going like that. And the he is the king, King George III. So Jefferson is purposely putting the blame on one person. He's not blaming all of the British, he's not blaming the entire British Parliament. He's trying to give this revolution a face, to give it an enemy. And so kind of blaming all of this on King George III of Britain. They're trying to make him the enemy, George III. He has done this, he has done that, and it goes on to the next page. Okay, and there's a whole bunch more. Now, some of these things, of course, they're complaining about taxes, they're complaining about their legislatures being dissolved, they're complaining about laws that had been in operation being thrown out, no courts, refusal of a trial by juries, no taxation without representation. That's probably something that you've heard. So these are all of their complaints. All right, so here would be, for example, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. That would be no taxation without representation. Of course, some of the other events that we've learned about, quartering large troops among us, like in Boston, the Redcoats in Boston, the people of Boston were certainly against that. And so they go through this long, long, long list of grievances about all the things that they blame the king for. And it even goes on to the very last page of the document. And they continue to make their case. Now we're going to come toward the end of the document here, where they're going to make their final case, their closing argument. So this paragraph here, it says, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. Then it says, a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. So by a prince, they mean the king. By him doing all these things, he has no right to govern us, to govern the Americans. Now, in the second to last paragraph, this is the only place where they really blame the British Parliament, the other part of the British government besides the king, and they refer to them as our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would have inevitably interrupted our connections and correspondence. They, too, have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. So they do hold somewhat the British people accountable and the Parliament accountable for not listening when they complained about all these things the king had done. So they kind of say, well, the rest of Britain, you are to blame too, even though we're mostly blaming the king. Now, the final paragraph, and there's some important words here in the closing. We, therefore, the representatives of these United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the supreme judge of the world. So again, they mention God, but they don't say God. Supreme judge of the world, for the recessitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from the allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. So this last statement here, this is the actual declaring of independence. Even though we call the whole document the Declaration of Independence, this is the actual statement which does it right there. And now we get to the bottom. And that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war. So these are the powers of a country. Levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, etc., etc., and to do all the acts and things which independent states may have right to. So they're saying, we're a country. We're going to do all the things countries do. Now, the last part is very important. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. So again, they refer to God without saying God. Like, we hope God's on our side. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So they're saying we, the men who write this, we all together pledge. We'll lay down our lives for this cause. We'll put our money behind this cause. And this probably they would have considered the most important thing, their sacred honor. We're going to put our good names behind this. We're going to sign this document, we're going to stand by it, and we're going to live by it. And then when you get to the signatures, number one, it's important that they did sign it. That's incredibly important. If they didn't sign it and America lost the revolution, they could have just lied and denied it. Oh, no, that's not me. I had nothing to do with that. And also, if they didn't sign it, it wouldn't give the people in America, the people fighting, a whole lot of confidence. But the fact that these men sign it, they're putting their lives on the line. If they're caught, they're traitors by the British. They'll be put to death. And if they're willing to put their names on it, it shows confidence that maybe the people in the army can take, like, all right, these guys are willing to stick their necks out there. They're behind us if we're out here actually fighting the battles. So they do sign it so they couldn't lie, deny it later, and to give the people some encouragement. When you look at the actual signatures, this is probably the most famous one. The signature of John Hancock. He was the president of the Congress. He was the first to sign it, and he, of course, made his very, very large signature, the famous John Hancock signature. He was from Massachusetts, and he was president of the Congress. Some other names on here you'll recognize. It's signed by 2 future U.S. presidents. It's signed by John Adams of Massachusetts. It's signed by Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. Of course, he was the one who wrote it. It is signed by Richard Henry Lee. He's the man that actually proposed independence. So it's his proposal that they were voting on to declare independence. Other people that you might recognize, here's Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was there of Pennsylvania. And of course, all these other people here. Notice that it's a list of all men, and no women were invited, no Native Americans were invited, but these are the signers of the Declaration of Independence, and quite a number of them will also take part in the signing of the Constitution many, many years later. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson's words from the Declaration of Independence. Think about that phrase, the pursuit of happiness. He knows that happiness is not guaranteed. And when we look back at our history, we know that we always haven't done the right things. We always haven't achieved happiness. But maybe it's the pursuit that's the most important thing. We do make mistakes. But maybe the important lesson that America needs to know is that we're always trying. We're always pursuing. We're always trying to hit those ideals. So, until next time, thanks for watching. Be safe, be well. See you again next time. Bye-bye.